to give this talk for the Dhamma Center community, and we are ever so grateful for his contribution. So Dr. Udayan is a consultant psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst with more than 25 years of experience in the field of Buddhism and science. So I'm very excited. I've heard Dr. Udayan speak at a couple of forums, and we were all blown away by his presentations many times, and I'm not kidding. So we are very happy to. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to Dr. Udayan to speak about compassion and the neuroplasticity. The reason that we have decided to sort of go with compassion and neuroplasticity, why I recommended such a topic to Dr. Udayan, and Dr. Udayan also very gracefully accepted, because this topic of compassion within Buddhism specifically, we have so much of roots, and it is almost a foundation practice within Buddhism to be compassionate. One would even say if a person who is a Buddhist is not compassionate, whether he is even a Buddhist, right? So if you are a Buddhist, you have to be compassionate. It is a part and parcel of the BUHH, BUDDHIST, the Buddhist word, right? So without further ado, Dr. Udaya, please, it is all yours, Dr. Udaya. Hold on. Doctor, I think I will hold on for a moment. Yes, doctor, you're unmuted now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Fante. Can you hear me all right now?
Very good.
Good afternoon, Pante. Good afternoon, Ricky. I see you there. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends in the Dharma. Well, I better deliver after that introduction by Pante. First of all, welcome, and it's a great pleasure to be asked to give this talk. I feel very privileged and honored. I've known Pante over quite a period of time and Ricky over many more years, and it's lovely to be involved with something that you guys are doing for the communities based in Colchester and internationally. So thank you. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, friends in the Dharma, I hope you're all well and safe right now. Obviously, we're going through some unprecedented times with tremendous implications on our physical well-being, on our mental health, and it is a difficult time, no doubt about it. But hopefully, our practice, our presence in the Dharma will give us some grounding and some stability in these difficult times, and also hopefully we can sort of be of some comfort and counsel to our families, our friends, people in the workplace. Right, as Bhante has said, I have been a practicing psychiatrist for many years. I first became a junior psychiatrist in 1992, and I joined the Buddhist Society in Eccleston Square near Victoria in London, which is the oldest Buddhist society in the West, in 1994. And although I started training in the Zen tradition under the Venerable Myokyoni, who was affiliated to the Buddhist Society for many, many years, I actually am very, very fond of, and I think it's very, very important not to be limited to one's own tradition. So I follow the Tibetan tradition, the Theravadan tradition, and the Japanese Pure Land tradition. I think it's important. Right, the title of this talk is Compassion and Neuroplasticity. Well, compassion, we all know what compassion is. It is I mean, very similar to the word empathy, but it's actually living in the other one's shoes, feeling the other one's pain as if it was my own pain. And then true compassion isn't just an idea in my head. It isn't just some concept. It actually engages us to do something for people. So compassion quite often has ethical and functional relations as well. We'll come back to that in a bit. Neuroplasticity. What is neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity is a technical scientific term which basically means that our brain actually adapts and changes its very structure, its anatomy, and consequently its function, its physiology. So, as you know, we have brain cells that are called neurons, billions and billions of them. And these neurons, they form pathways and they meet at what's called synapses, joints. So where a neuron connects with another neuron, from each neuron, hundreds and thousands of little tiny, very fine filament-like elements come out of a neuron. They're called the dendrites, and they seek out and actually make connection with other neurons. And what we have found, particularly in the last 25, 30 years or so, this is basically the science of neuroscience, neurocognitive sciences, is that these neuronal connections, synapses, they actually change. So, for instance, when we learn the piano from an early age, a particular area of our left prefrontal cortex. So the left prefrontal, this is my left side. You're seeing it on the television, on the monitor as my right, but actually I'm pointing to my left side. So this front bit of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex. So you've got the left frontal cortex, the right. As you know, the brain is two cerebral hemispheres with a bit in the middle where the two hemispheres communicate. It's called the corpus callosum, or the bridge where the brain communicates. What we've now found recently is that different functions, different executive functions, are associated with functioning in different areas of the brain. So, for instance, the emotions are rooted in the limbic system, which is a very old system, sort of not in the cortex, but in the middle of the brain. I don't want to get too technical with anatomy, but suffice it to know that different functions and the higher executive functions that we have, attention, memory, registering of facts, interpretation of facts, perspective, cognitive bias, all this kind of stuff are predominantly, a lot of it is to do with the prefrontal cortex and the grey matter, and also the limbic system, which is emotional regulation. So neuroplasticity basically means that as with physical training, if we train our physical body, our muscles get stronger and they're agile and they're very fit, etc. It's the same with brain. So the pianist I was talking about, from an early age, a person who learns to do piano, certain areas of the brain are accentuated, certain connections are made deeper, and then the neuronal circuitry functions so that electrical impulses, going very fast, are activated again and again and again. So when a great pianist plays, after many years of learning and trials and training, it becomes automatic, doesn't it? So it is with walking. So it is with talking. When we were little kids growing up, we made these connections as part of growing up. And the example of the little baby, it tries to, eventually it tries to learn how to walk, and eventually it gets up, it falls down repeatedly, it has a little cry, but it tries again and again and again and again, and eventually, the story, we all learn to walk. We don't think about walking, do we? We don't think about any of our bodily functions. It just happens. But at some point, those connections needed to be made. So what we are doing in Buddhist training, from a neuroanatomical point of view, is actually in the process of training, long hours of meditation practice over many, many years, what we are now discovering in the laboratory is that there's actually profound anatomical and physiological changes. And this is proper science, and some of the great scientific minds in the world, it's some of the most prestigious university laboratories and private laboratories are involved in this work. And I'll go through a few of those. As that is the basis of my talk. On a separate note, obviously, science is very important, and some would say that perhaps science is the new religion of the modern age. So it's important, I suppose, that ancient wisdom is being validated by modern science. Not that I need it. I don't need a scientist to tell me what's good or what's bad, because in the words of the Buddha himself, we do things and we find out for ourselves what is good and what is conducive to good health, mental health and physical health, and what isn't. It is like, so it was a nice hot sunny day earlier. On a hot summer's day, you have an ice cream, you know automatically that it's a good feeling. You don't have to be told about it by someone. Or when you taste water, you know immediately what the temperature of the water is. You don't need to read into sort of research books or whatever. But still, it's nice to have this theoretical framework behind what's going on, because, it can be of help. So all this stuff about the technical term nowadays is research into the contemplative traditions, neurocognoscience of contemplative traditions. And actually, they have done studies especially over the last 25 years, incredible amount of studies that looks at various forms of meditation in particular, and how it affects the brain, not only anatomically and physiologically, but actually in terms of behavior. They're now actually making correlates between anatomy, physiology, and actual human behavior. Because let's be honest, if it doesn't actually translate into human behavior, well, it's not worth much, is it? So all this started many, many years ago, actually, in the early 30s, where in America, an Indian yogi, a meditator, went over there, and he was actually studying physiology, and he did some original experiments, but that wasn't very scientifically validated. The methodology was wrong, and it wasn't peer-reviewed, but that was the roots of it. And then there were some interesting studies done here and there now and then over in the 50s and 60s, but nothing significant, nothing that is going to hold up to modern scientific scrutiny. The first real kind of game changer in all this was a chap called Kabat-Zinn, who was a psychologist in America, Kabat-Zinn. He started doing actual experiments and clinical trials with his patients and his research assistants at a university in America, Kabat-Zinn, and you probably heard of mindfulness-based stress reduction, which he's been advocating as early as the mid-80s. And his trials results were coming in, and one of the big issues in science is that one person's set of results isn't good enough for scientific validity. They must be repeated again and again. So one person saying so, is helpful, but when you do these experiments and trials repeatedly all around the world, then there can be no disputing the fact. So Kabat-Zinn started what's called mindfulness-based stress reduction, and it was quite simple. It was an 8-week course of basic mindfulness for 1 to 2 hours a day, and after that, it was categorically shown that your heart rate goes down, your blood pressure goes down, your breathing rate goes down. These are physiological effects. This is what the supreme elite athlete tries to aim for. These Olympic sprinters and the great athletes. Well, they have this incredible ability through years of training, and their sort of biophysical markers, as we call them, biophysical, which is like the pulse rate, the heart rate, the breathing rate, the blood pressure, and lots of other things, sophisticated tests like cortisol test, when cortisol is a stress hormone. When we are stressed, the cortisol levels go up, how we respond to that. So there are lots of what's called biophysical, biological markers of stress. Clearly they go down. And Guess what? At the same time, these same people reported significant reduction in anxiety, in mind-wandering states, improved attention, concentration, ability to do things, even boring, mundane chores, things that I normally would find incredibly boring, whatever. Lots of incredible things were coming out of this one, excuse me, pioneering study by Kabat-Zinn, and it's called MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. This really was a revolutionary development in Western psychology. So then in the NHS, and I kind of grew up with this because I started working in the NHS in 1991 as a junior doctor. I did my first year in medicine and surgery, and immediately I started specializing in psychiatry. So I've actually grown up with this phenomena through the mid-90s when it was slowly coming into clinical practice, mindfulness. Interestingly enough, the professor of psychiatry, Bob Gelder at Oxford University, if you look up the Oxford textbook of psychiatry, as early as the late 60s, early 70s, professor of psychiatry was advocating the use of meditation, not only for physical welfare, he had been doing it for many years, but also for mental health. But of course, in those days, when he was postulating that yoga and particularly meditation is particularly good for mental health, we just didn't have the evidence, the scientific evidence. And you know, in science, without evidence, it's just a theory. So then we had MBSR, and it revolutionized clinical psychology in the West. And by the late 90s, mindfulness was becoming a buzzword. And basically by 2005, it was pretty much being used in a lot of clinical settings within the NHS and in private practice, not just in this country, but globally. Now, of course, we Buddhists have been doing mindfulness meditation for 2,500 years. And before that, even before the time of the Buddha in India, certainly you had the yogic traditions of contemplations, you know, retreating off to the jungle or the forests or the mountains and, you know, following the path within. So it's an ancient tradition, but obviously it's only now that we are getting scientific validity and evidence for it. Following on from Kabat-Zinn's MBSR, we then had at Oxford, actually, my own old university, I was at Oxford University, where Professors Teasdale and Williams have now developed the MBSR model to mindfulness-based CBT. CBT stands for cognitive behavior therapy, and I believe a week or two ago, one of the other guest speakers gave a talk on CBT and mindfulness-based CBT, so I won't go into too much. But to cut a long story short, cognitive behavior therapy has been used in clinical depression for many years. Professor Aaron Beck, the founder of CBT, he's actually now very much involved in the mindfulness movement, and cognitive behavior therapy simply means that we use our cognitions, our thoughts, to change our behavior. To give you an example, I go to work in the morning, I say good morning to my secretary. My secretary is lost in her own private world. She might have had an argument with her partner the morning or whatever. She forgets to say good morning to me. Now that could set up a chain reaction in me, couldn't it? I wonder what's wrong with my secretary. Is she well? Did I say something bad to her yesterday? Oh gosh. Oh no, I hope I didn't overdo it with her the other day. And so on and so on. It could simply be that she was lost in her own world. She didn't even hear me saying good morning. And then I have an internal automatic sort of reaction mechanism in my mind where I interpret that one simple event. My secretary didn't return my good morning. And there I go, round and round and round in circles, thinking, have I done something? Am I overworking her, etc., etc.? And that could mess up my day, couldn't it? Whereas with CBT, a simple reminder, well, whatever, you know, and this starts with mindfulness. If I am mindful, aware of the fact that I'm having a reaction to my secretary not returning my goodbye, I can snap it instantly and get on with my work. Classic example, you go to work, you are driving, maybe you had an argument with a friend or your partner or your son, or maybe your boss said something to you yesterday, and there you are driving. You're not driving, you are driving, thankfully, but you're not becoming very mindful because you're going on replaying this incident with your boss or with your partner or whatever. And, next time I'll show him, I'm going to do this. I was too weak. I should have responded, blah, blah, blah. And actually, if you're not careful, driving in that state, you're getting worked up, you'll have an accident soon. It's happened to me almost a few times where I was so carried away with past events or future expectations that I was actually not being mindful of the job in hand, which is, in the case of driving, a very serious thing. So mindfulness doesn't just have spiritual connotations, it actually has practical, daily, everyday connotations. So back to Professors Teasdale and Mark Williams from Oxford University. They developed the MBSR model to mindfulness-based CBT, which is an offshoot of CBT. CBT inherently implies mindfulness because you can't really do CBT if you're not aware or mindful of your own thoughts and feelings. It is now clinically proven, beyond doubt, it is actually in the NICE guidelines, National Institute of Clinical Experience, that CBT, and specifically mindfulness-based CBT, is very good for first episode depression. You may even not have to take any antidepressant drugs. It's that powerful. And if you keep on doing it regularly, just half an hour of meditation a day, it actually prevents relapses of your depression. So people, there's three types of depression. There's unipolar depression, where you just have depression, it's a one-off episode, and that's that. You also have bipolar depression, where you can have manic episodes and depressive episodes, or you can have chronic recurrent depressive disorder, where you are just depressed, but you have recurrent bouts of it regardless of external circumstances. Well, now we know for a fact that mindfulness-based CBT is very good for unipolar depression. Even in bipolar depression, it has been shown to be of some benefit. But this is all old news. This has been around for the last 15, 20 years, so I won't bore you too much about all this. You've already had it all. Incidentally, antidepressant medications, yes, I prescribe them quite a lot because many of my patients demand it, expect it in this current sort of pill-popping society. But they're not pleasant things. They do have nasty side effects. And a lot of my patients tell me that they take over one's life and they quite often mask one's feelings. And taking antidepressants, it's like putting some blocker on your mind. And I haven't taken antidepressants, thankfully, but a lot of my patients really don't like it. And of course, when I talk to them about meditation and cognitive behavior therapy and all that, there are no side effects. If done in the right way, under guidance, with an authentic lineage from a teacher who comes from an authentic lineage. I'm obviously not referring to some fads and cults. There are lots of crazy cults and institutions out there, but no, I'm not talking about that. Those are totally different things, quite often brainwashing and conditioning. But what I'm talking about is authentic Dhamma centers like the one that we're affiliated to here right now, Bhante Center, and other. The lineage, the tradition, the history is very important. So if meditation is done properly, under guidance, in the right way, at the right pace, for the right person, there are no side effects. So I'm going to move on to specific types of meditations, particularly compassion, and what it does to the brain. Now, as Bhante introduced, there is no Buddhism without compassion. The two pillars of Buddhism are compassion and wisdom. In true compassion, the wisdom is inherently taken for granted. If it isn't compassion rooted in wisdom, it becomes emotional sentimentality, and there's a lot of that. We're not talking about that. True compassion is egolessness. It is not my compassion on a poor suffering victim and I feel good out of it. In true compassion, it is objectless, and it is one of the examples the masters give in various traditions. It is like the sun shining. The nature of the sun is simply to shine. It shines on saints and sinners alike. And that is what true compassion is. True compassion is not I interfering with other people. I think I know what's good for you, and I better give you a piece of my mind, whether you want it or not. The conquistadores, the Spanish invaders who went to America, to South America to convert them, that's not compassion. They wiped out millions of them. So compassion is rooted in wisdom, the two pillars of Buddhism. You can be wise, and there are many wise Buddhist scholars around who are technically incredibly knowledgeable about, doctrine and sutras and sastras and all that, but they're not very compassionate. So the first kind of studies, scientifically valid, methodologically sound studies that really scientists couldn't refute, started in the sort of late 70s, early 80s. And one of the first guys, a famous physiologist from UCLA, University College of Los Angeles, one of the top scientific institutes in the world. Apart from Oxbridge, you've got UCLA, Caltech, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I think these five, between the five of them, have pretty much most of the Nobel Prizes in science and engineering and medicine. Anyway, so Professor Keith Wallace from the UCLA, one of the professor of physiology there, he started off studying regular meditators of transcendental meditation. Why TM, transcendental meditation? Because at that point in America, there were an awful lot of guys doing TM, probably more so than Buddhism, mainly because in the 60s, the Maharishi Yogi and many others, great Indian saints, introduced it to America, and there was therefore a huge number of people doing that. Basically, he found that regular meditators of 5 years or under 5 years, so if you've done roughly about 5 years of meditation regularly, and roughly the average would equate to about an hour a day, your average biological age was 5 years lower than your chronological age. That's pretty profound, isn't it? So, let's say you started meditating at 30 and you've been doing it pretty much, regularly. I mean, obviously missing the odd day here and there on holidays, but let's say an hour a day, every day for pretty much 5 years. And on top, you probably went on a few retreats where you meditate longer hours, etc. Well, they found that the average biological age was 5 years lower than their chronological age. I mean, that's pretty profound. And meditators who had meditated for longer than 5 years, and here the actual numbers, hours of meditation you did was significant, their biological age in some instances was 12 years lower than the chronological age. That is incredibly significant. Let me back that up with some actual scientific, well, that is scientific, but there is a chemical in our brain, in our body, called DHEA. It's quite a long one. It stands for dihydroepiandrosterone. Dihydroepiandrosterone is basically an endogenous steroid hormone, which is a precursor to the male hormone testosterone. And this hormone level, DHEA, as we get older, it reduces in amount in our body. It's technically called a neurosteroid. It's a steroid hormone, steroid derivative synthesized within the body. It actually works specifically in our brain, and it also is technically called a neurotrophin. A trophin is a molecule that basically attaches to central receptors in the brain and then affects nerve cells and thereby affects regional functioning and global behavior. So DHEA is an incredibly important chemical, and it is highly significantly involved in the aging process. And DHEA levels normally go down as we get older. But in meditators, and again, the number of hours that you do, well, there's also different types of meditation, by the way. I'll come to that shortly. But the number of hours you do in your meditation directly affects the amount of DHEA levels in your body, and hence that's why advanced meditators, age far slower than normal people. This is when this came out and when this was published in 2002. I mean, it sent shockwaves around the world. So. Another example I'd like to give is another famous Professor Richard Davidson from the Laboratory for Effective Neuroscience at the University of Wisconsin, Michigan, another very prestigious place. And he studied volunteers who took just an 8-week course of Buddhist meditation, again, between 1 to 2 hours. They did a median sort of average daily length of meditation, I think 1 hour something, 10 minutes or something. Volunteers undertook just an 8-week course, Buddhist meditation. It showed greater activity in the left prefrontal cortex. Remember I started off with the prefrontal cortex? So it's right behind here, this bit going up to there, in the middle of my brain is the left, this is the right. So left prefrontal cortex, it actually got bigger slightly. Now, the ventricles, the actual cavities where the fluid is stored, the cerebrospinal fluid, which communicates with our vertebra, the spinal column, where the same fluid goes down. The ventricles also get bigger, but in people who only did it for 8 weeks, the actual ventricular size wasn't that significant. But people they studied this further in people who've been meditating for 5,000 hours, 10,000 hours. And now I'm talking about the professional monks, the Tibetan monks or the Theravadin monks who have been meditating for 15, 20, 30 odd years. I mean, their brains were a totally different ballgame altogether. They had bigger ventricular size, much fatter grey matter in the cortex, and there's a few other findings which I'll mention briefly. So greater activity in the left prefrontal cortex, and with it, there was a significant reduction of biophysical markers of mental health and anxiety, stress, depression. So what we found is people who have severe amounts of anxiety, stress, depression, anger management problems, antisocial personalities, that kind of thing, a lot of them have far greater activity in the right prefrontal cortex. And left cortical activity has been significantly correlated, and I use the word significantly correlated, with associations with happiness and relaxation. The DHEA, that chemical I talked about, the neurotrophin, that actually binds to nerve growth factor and brain-derived nerve factor, which nowadays we're advised to have cod liver oil and brain food. Well, this is the ultimate brain food, NGF, nerve growth factor, brain-derived nerve factor, BDNF. These are ultimate brain foods, and they clearly go up in meditation. Another area that research has been very prominent is in the immunological reactions, how our immunology is immune responses are better, and isn't it fitting that we are now living in this terrible situation with COVID, and the primary problem here is how the immune response is altered and taken advantage of by the virus to affect those that are particularly sensitive. Yet another example that I can give you is mindfulness-based interventions targeting neurocognitive mechanisms in addiction. Addiction is a massive thing all around the world, and it's so sad that despite all the material improvements in modern living and economy in the West, specifically, mental health is going up big time. It makes me so sad to see children as young as 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds self-harming. It is shocking. And within the last 15 years, it seems, since the advent of the internet and the mobile phone, the amount of mental health problems the young people are having is incredibly high. I mean, cyberbullying, social media bullying, all kinds of stuff. But it's not just that. You know, there are lots of reasons. But so, and there's a lot of addiction problems. So somehow mindfulness-based interaction, this is a growing field, the application of mindfulness-based interventions within the addiction field of psychiatry, where basically neurocognitive mechanisms that are very important to the attention, appraisal, emotion interface. There are particular very tiny areas in the brain where connections, we're beginning to discover neuronal pathways that are implicated in addiction, and you know, we're beginning to see incredibly positive results. So, compassion. Buddhist meditators who have been specifically, as I said, there are different types of meditation. So the Hindu yoga, there are various types of yoga that has a particular type of meditation. Hindu systems have another type of meditation. There are meditations, specifically in the Hindu tradition, where quite often you're trying to get into a trance-like state, and you know, and some meditations they achieve different results. So for instance, quite often in trance-like ecstasy states that you read about, where I was in bliss and the whole universe and I became one, blah, 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 quite often one is actually insensitive to external stimuli. That is not Buddhist meditation. In Buddhist meditation, nothing is filtered out. All things. So it's a bit pointless to be meditating upstairs in your bedroom, to be completely tranced out, and there's a fire starting in your basement, and you're so tranced out that you don't even pick that up. That would be a bit futile, wouldn't it? So various particular studies have found that various different types of meditation have different physiological effects. Most of what I'm talking about is specifically Buddhist meditation. And as you know, there are two types of beginners meditation. There's, when we come into meditation, we hear the teachers talk about two types of meditation, don't we? Samatha, which is meditation on an object as a focus, the breath, a mantra, a chant, whatever, and vipassana, which is the open-ended, insight-orientated meditation, where we let things be as they are. We just observe the internal and external states and try neither to control nor to regulate, but just let things. So vipassana. Funnily enough, in the scientific world, they've actually, they weren't happy with accepting the Buddhist labels as they are. They actually gave them scientific terms. So samatha, believe it or not, becomes focused attention meditation, FAM. Very original. And vipassana becomes open monitoring meditation, OMM. And generally the goal is from samatha to eventually move on to vipassana, and then one can have other kinds of targeted meditations like compassion and emptiness, anatta. Compassion can quite often start off with a visualization. I won't go through the compassion meditations directly. I think Bhante is much better at doing that kind of thing. But basically, we start off, you know, thinking about people we love, our family, and how we, evoking those powerful feelings, and then gradually moving on to impersonal love, and even thinking of people that we may not be very fond of. I remember the sun shining on saints and sinners. Oscar Wilde, the great English playwright from more than 100 years ago, he said something interesting on morality, kind of compassion, you could say. Morality is our attitude towards those that we don't particularly like. That's where morality is revealed. A bit like Jesus saying, love thine enemies. Of course, we love our family and friends and immediate neighbors. And even with them, quite often it's difficult to, be loving and compassionate, isn't it? Far less with strangers and people we don't like. But that's where it is. So specific forms of meditation like compassion, and compassion is a particular one because, as Ante said right at the beginning, compassion, altruism, is the true tenet of Buddhism. And when we give to others, of course, we have felt a joy. We all have. This is why, you know, the mother giving to her child, or even strangers to each other. And interestingly, now in this terrible COVID climate, the governments may not be doing so well, but isn't it beautiful, awesome to hear that ordinary people are doing so much for each other? You know, in India, for instance, the response hasn't been great, and there have been lots of problems, but you can see all these non-governmental organizations caring for the migrant workers. I mean, some of the stories you hear, on the one hand, are incredibly depressing, but on the other hand, and I prefer to look at the more uplifting stories, there are incredible acts of charity being performed by ordinary people, and by ordinary, I mean some of the poorest people are actually doing incredible amounts of work. So this thing, compassion, it is a natural thing inherent within us. And the more we practice the Buddha's way, and the more we meditate, whether specifically on compassion or samatha or vipassana, this compassion quality naturally comes out. Just like if you polish a jewel, it naturally starts shining. So one of the pioneers in this particular field, and there's somebody I will recommend in particular, he was branded the happiest man on earth in Time magazine a few years ago. His name is Matthew Ricard, R-I-C-A-R-D. Matthew Ricard. He's about 70 years old now, and he's a Tibetan Buddhist monk. He was a Frenchman. He was born to a famous French philosopher. His father was an amazing philosopher, and he grew up in the 60s, kind of avant-garde circles. I mean, he even used to know, you know, people like Stravinsky, the great composer, and, you know, philosophers and artists and all that. And he was studying for his PhD. He actually got his PhD. He's a doctor. In a famous Louis Pasteur Institute in France, under a Nobel Prize winning laureate, studying in the biology of cellular mechanisms. It's not my specialist field, but he was a specialist in that. But from an early age, in his early teens, living the life of affluence and hanging out in a very upwardly mobile social scenario, seeing all that, he realized there's something missing. And somehow he ended up in his late teens, early 20s. He ended up going to Darjeeling in North India, and then he started meeting with famous Tibetan lamas, Tibetan masters, and he sort of, you know, during his spare time, he would go off there, spend time with them, then come back to the lab. Anyway, eventually he did his PhD, and he had a brilliant scientific career open to him. He chose not to pursue that, but to become a monk. And thankfully for us, his interest in science never waned. He's still very much interested in science, and he has joined the Mind Life Institute that His Holiness the Dalai Lama started, and something I follow. I'm very interested in this. His Holiness Dalai Lama started this in the late 80s, and it's really started growing with famous pioneering scientists. The idea is to gather some of the leading scientists in the world in various fields, not just mental health and biological psychiatry, neuropsychiatry, but also in quantum physics, and more recently the environmentalists are getting on board, because we've also found a lot of similarities between the modern findings of, you know, the new physics, quantum metaphysics, and Buddhism. And the Mind Life Institute really is a gathering of great minds every year from around the world, where scientists and contemplatives, i.e. monks and religious practitioners, get together, and we give our views. The contemplatives give their first-hand accounts, first-person experiences, and the scientists with their third-person objective studies, we get together. So Matthew Ricard, why was he the happiest man on the earth? Right, when you meditate for long hours, your brain has a certain electrical signal. How do we measure brain electrical signals? We put electrodes all over your brain. It's called an EEG, electroencephalogram. bit like the ECG that you put on your heart, sorry, left side, you put on your heart for the electrical activity of the heart whenever you go into hospital or your GP practice, ECG. Well, this is the EEG. It basically shows various electrical activities and patterns, rhythmic patterns of the brain. It is generally desirable to be having what's called gamma wave activity. These oscillations between 40 and 60 hertz. And these oscillations, so when the brain is operating in gamma wave, we are incredibly relaxed, deeply relaxed. Very few people ever, normal people without meditation, they hardly ever reach gamma wave activity. Some athletes do because they've trained their bodies, but they can only hold it for very brief periods of time. After their race is over, they're back to pretty much their normal. So this is only in incredibly, and the longer you meditate, the stronger your gamma wave signature. So meditators with 2,000 to 1,000 hours of practice, they found, and this is the really incredible, even when they're sleeping in deep sleep, their brain is still operating in gamma wave activity. So that means that they're incredibly calm, composed, serene, and showing all the things we read about as the products of training, serenity, equanimity, all that kind of stuff. Now, you might think 2,000 hours, gosh, that's a hell of a lot of hours of practice. But if you think about it, 2 hours a day, which, for a lot of people doing regular practice is not that much an amount. 2 hours a day for 1 year, that's, more than 750 hours. And then a lot of people go on retreats, 5-day retreats, 7-day retreats. So, it's about a year to 2 years. It's not a big deal. And, 2,000 hours has that kind of significant effect. Just to give you a few other examples, we do things in science called meta-analysis. What that means is you have one study and that has a set of results. That one study, as I said before, you wanted to repeat it. So when you look at this, a study investigating the same function, the effect of mindfulness on gamma wave activity, or the effect of meditation on anxiety markers, etc., whatever your topic is, if you then combine hundreds such studies and you combine the results from 100 such studies, that's called a meta-analysis, M-E-T-A, not meta as in meta in Buddhism, meta, M-E-T-A, meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is a much more powerful scientific tool where the probabilities are much higher and there's very, very negative bias. You have all kinds of biases in scientific studies. So basically, to cut a long story short, when you have meta-analysis, it shows that the conclusions you're making are pretty much more than 95% accurate. Well, meta-analysis have shown that that different meditation styles have different positive effects. And just to give another example, there are lots of physiological events, phenomena we are beginning to explore. So another example I like to give is something called habituation. Habituation is a process whereby when we receive sensory data, sensory stimuli, whatever, the first time we receive it, it's perceived as, if we receive it, that is, if we are aware of it at all in the first place, we perceive it as fresh and original, and it creates an impact. Imagine your first sunset, or the first time you smelt a beautiful rose, or whatever. Well, with most of us, if that stimulus is repeated, we become desensitized to it, we become habituated to it. So it's not fresh anymore, it's not original anymore. And we can tell that from the frequencies of the brain waves that are going. Well, in people who meditate quite a lot, this habituation process is diminished, which means that every time, even your 500th stimulus, the same stimulus, a bell being rung or whatever, it has exactly the same it evokes the same physiological and consequently behavioral correlates as it was the first time. Another example I could give, for instance, would be there is a technical neurophysiological term called binocular rivalry. What that means is when you see things with two eyes, usually our brain combines the two images from the two eyes, and at any one time we actually see only one thing. So my left eye is seeing one aspect of something, my right eye is seeing another aspect. Obviously, I can't really have double vision. We haven't been hardwired for that, otherwise that wouldn't be very clever, going around with each eye having a separate image. So what the brain does, it uses a fancy process called yes, thanks. It uses a fancy process called ocular suppression, whereby one eye image is suppressed in preference to the other. And in normal individuals, this happens automatically and there's no control. In people who are advanced meditators, we're finding that even something as biological as ocular suppression, where you suppress the image from one eye, which is done completely automatically, even that is under conscious control. So there's all these kinds of aspects of modern neurocognitive science that we're finding that sort of give impetus to this rapidly growing research field. Now, I've noticed Bhante has said we're going to close soon for asking questions. It's been a bit of a sort of scientific lecture. I just want to finish with a couple of examples about the power of compassion from my own personal experience. So I used to have a patient a few years ago. She was in her 60s. She was very successful. She was in the city, earning a lot of money. Unfortunately, she was in a relationship that wasn't going anywhere, and she didn't have any children. And I used to see her like every 6 weeks to 2 months in my clinic. And over a period of a year, I must have seen her about 6 times. And it was quite a dread for me as well, because this woman had had pretty much all the medication under the sun. She even had combination therapy. She was actually on maximum doses of 2 antidepressants. We sometimes combine 2 antidepressants if one antidepressant isn't enough. She was on maximum doses of 2 antidepressants and an antipsychotic, believe it or not. She wasn't psychotic, but she was also an antipsychotic started by a previous psychiatrist, and it was doing nothing but giving a side effect. We sometimes use an antipsychotic in severe resistant depression to augment, increase the efficacy of an antidepressant. And I think she liked me for some reason, because I would ask her questions about her lifestyle, about things that interested her, things that meant something to her. And one day, out of the blue, she just said, "I feel so sorry for you, psychiatrist, having to sit here, listen to me, go on and on again and again, and there's nothing you can do about it." Nice one. Made me feel pretty impotent, didn't it? There's nothing I can do. Thanks. I just didn't know what to say to her. And I said to her, I said, "You're right, actually. You're absolutely right. We psychiatrists know, we don't know that much about the mind. We think we do. We possibly know 1% of the mind. Even our antidepressants, the strike rate, the efficacy rate is pretty much the same as the placebo rate." So we started laughing. And then she said to me, I asked her, "But tell me, when were you happy in life? Can you remember a few occasions when you were the happiest?" She said, "Oh, apart from my childhood, you know, in my adult life, there were a few times." And she said it was late in her late 20s. She went to Bali, Java, Sumatra, you know, Bali, Indonesia. And she went there on holiday. She saw the street children there, the orphans, and she got so moved that she actually ended up doing some charity work for them for about a month. And once a year, every summer holiday, she would go there and she would spend time with the charity and she would do things. And she said, that was the time I was happiest. And she did this for about 10 years, but then life took over her situation. As I said, she was a very busy, successful city corporate lawyer, and she got sucked into all that. So I said to her, I said, "Well, why don't you do that again? Start it again." And she said, "Doctor, do you really think?" I mean, that was young. That was me when I was young all those years ago. "I'm not going to get the same." I said, "Just try it." Anyway, to cut a long story short, after another 2 or 3 sessions, she said to me, right, doctor, I'm going to take your advice. I'm going to go there. I'm going to have a divorce because, my husband's having an affair. It's pointless. I don't have children. What am I doing here? It's pointless. So she tied up her affairs. She, saved a huge amount of money, bought herself a little flat here in London, moved away from the big house she was living in, went off to Bali. And you know what? She used to actually stay in touch with me for a good 3 years. I haven't been in touch with her very recently. And she used to tell me wonderful things. And basically, within 6 months, she had come off all her medications and she was happy as a little girl. And she was grateful to me because, I did say to her that, yeah, I'll go there and, if things start working out slowly, and we'd stay in touch, and I advised her how to come off the medication. And she also started a meditation class, and, and as I said, we stayed in touch for a good 6 years, and she used to send me glowing accounts of her activities, and she was so happy, and she never had a relapse. Right, that's just a living example, from my own life, how powerful, the process of compassion can be. Because all that treatment here, all those psychiatrists she saw for all those years, we were basically barking up the wrong tree. If some psychiatrist had the bottle to tell her, what gave you pleasure, just go and do it, it would have worked. Interestingly enough, she came to that kind of conclusion herself because she chose to tell me all this. So I think I'll end it there, Bhante, for now. And if people want to ask questions, is that okay? I can't hear you.
Absolutely, doctor. Thank you so much for that session. So if you would like to ask any questions from Dr. Udayan, the floor is all yours. The floor is all yours. But before we get to the questions, I'm going to, shotgun my position here and ask a question first.
Yeah.
If corruption of power. But doctor, what I want to ask is, we have, with also what you mentioned, the rate at which young people are affected by depression, all sorts of mental illnesses, they need help. Yeah. As a parent, as a carer, as a loved one, what or how can we initially, what could we do to better their situation mentally, right? That is my question, doctor. It might be a bit broad, but, a few tips that you could share with us with your experience.
It's a very common, popular question, Bhante. It is something I get asked by parents a lot. Not just parents of young children, but partners, spouses. How can I support my loved one? The most important thing is the general support, okay? So being there for them, listening to them, listening to their problems, and not belittling them. Yeah. Here, particularly in Britain, 50 years ago, there was a saying, just pull your socks up. Yeah. It's nothing serious. I mean, that's not going to be, that's not very compassionate, because clearly that person has a serious problem. So if it's serious, obviously, if it's very serious, I mean, somebody is suicidal, right? That's a lot of my work is dealing at the heavy end of psychiatry. I work in a crisis team. And my basic job is to decide if somebody needs admission to a psychiatric hospital or not. If it's serious, obviously, you need professional help. If it's not that serious, if it's sort of dissatisfaction, the classic translation of dukkha, unease, dissatisfaction, not going anywhere in life, loss of meaning, loss of purpose. I mean, that happens in young people anyway. When you were 16, 17, 18, you're experimenting, you're not quite sure, blah, blah, blah. That's part of the book. But, it is giving them space to be, to allow them to talk unconditionally, to listen to them, to listen to their anxieties. If they want to, that is, if they want to. A lot of young people, for instance, teens, they may not want to talk to their parents, But the real best example is leading by example. Leading by example. Chances are, if you are the right person, you don't even have to say anything, because you know children are very smart. They pick up. They pick up news, and rather than preaching to them, leading by example. Can I just briefly give a story to that? A very brief story.
Please go ahead.
So there was a famous Zen master in Japan 45 odd years ago. This is a true story. He had a disciple, and this a married couple, the man in his 50s, the woman in her late 40s, and they had one son. The father would come from work, and he would have a few drinks every day, and he would be vegging in front of the television with the mum having cooked her food. They would work, and the son was expected, he was about 15, 16 years old, he was expected to study while father and mother are watching EastEnders or Coroner or whatever it is people watch. All right? The son was obviously not interested. He too wanted to watch whatever his parents were watching. They were having a good time, and there's him, having done school all day, he's being forced to study for hours. So naturally, he rebelled, and he's not going to do it. Father and mother gave many a talk. Relatives came over, you know, old uncles and granddad, everybody had their tuppence worth. It wasn't working. If anything, the son was rebelling even more, and now even started missing a few days of school. The problem was getting worse. So in desperation, this went on for a year. The man of the house, the father, went to his Zen master and said, "Master, here is a problem. What can I do?" Interestingly, the master, the very first thing he said, "What are you doing at home?" Rather than focusing on the child and the teenager, what are you doing? So the father says, "Yeah, this is our pattern." And he goes, "Well, don't you think that that might have some impact, what you are doing on your child?" So I tell you what, why don't you, you say you're interested in Buddhism, you're interested in this, why don't you spend a couple of hours, you come home, you relax a bit and you do a bit of work, your wife can take up a bit of needlework and all this, and just try it. And guess what? A month later, the son realized, Mum and Dad ain't having a great time, Dad's studying, Mum's doing her work, he started studying himself. So the example being, our own behavior goes a long way than actually preaching to people. But general support. So if it's genuine mental illness, you've got to be careful not to use meditation there, because meditation can actually cause more problems in genuine mental illness. So if it's genuine, in our group, we always say you've got to be of a sufficient mental stability to undertake meditation. Absolutely. Because you're going deep into yourself. And it can open up many can of worms, especially people with traumatic pasts and victims and all that. There it can be dangerous. So yes, psychiatric work is needed to achieve a degree of stability, and after that, meditation work can start. But generally, it's supportive and helping things. Like if your partner is having a problem, physical pain causing mental pain, what can I do for you to help you? That kind of thing. If somebody is conducive, if somebody has got an interest in Dhamma, maybe saying the odd thing that has an impact, on for instance, let's say I've lost it, even though I'm a practitioner of Buddhism for 25 odd years, we all lose it from time to time. And my wife just reminds me a pithy little sentence. In my case, my problems are usually when I'm driving and some idiot cuts you up or does something, and I tend to go off into a rant. Well, my rants have reduced to 10 seconds now, as opposed to 5 minutes. All the wife needs to do is just say something like, "There you go again."
Absolutely.
Little tips like that. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. Is there anyone else who would like to make a use of this situation and ask Doctor a question? You could use the hands up option to signal to me, and I will unmute your mic should you require to ask a question.
If there are no questions, if there are no questions, perhaps
there is one question, Doctor. Just Don, why don't you ask your question, Don, please?
Hello, Udan. This is Don.
Oh, hello. Hi.
Thank you so much for this course. It's really quite interesting. what do you think of the new orchestrated objective reduction theory developed by Penrose and Hameroff, which goes deeper into the fact that within the neurons there are microtubules and that they communicate through quantum vibration?
It's a plausible theory. I'm not that familiar with that particular aspect, but Penrose is a man I have a lot of respect for. It is a plausible theory, but that's all it is. It's a theory, and it can ultimately never be fully proven, because as I mentioned in my talk, there is the first person narrative, which is the actual meditator experiencing states himself or herself, and then there is the third person, so-called objective narrator, the scientist. So whether it's tubules or strings or M brains or P brains or multi-dimensional universes, you see what I mean? It's a theory, and I think, you know, the fact, I mean, they're not saying anything new. All they've done is given a slightly different twist. They're actually suggesting a structure to this internal communication. But the real thing that really matters is the fact that in the West, traditionally one has looked outwards, yeah, whereas now the science of inner looking, the contemplative science, as a tradition is massive. And so, yes, there are new developments, and that's something that I'm not that familiar with. I'm sort of more into the research on meditation and its behavior, but there is a lot of science that's coming into it, and the fact that these tubules communicate through, you know, quantum vibrations, it wouldn't surprise me at all. It's perfectly plausible, and, you know, as I said, Penrose, you know, Sir Roger Penrose is a profound thinker, and I think, you know, it will need scientific studies again to become absorbed in mainstream science.
Yes, one of the things, sorry, just a tiny follow-up observation. One of the things which Penrose, whom I also respect as probably one of UK's most eminent scientists,
Yes,
have admitted the fact that you cannot really quantify or measure through a computer process the whole area of consciousness.
absolutely, absolutely, totally. And it's profound that somebody as with such a brilliant mind as Penrose has actually come out saying it. That actually is saying that ultimately the observer-observed interaction, isn't it? Exactly what he's saying. Yeah, and it's wonderful that he's said that, because that is the limitations of science. That you know, I, in the process of observing that which I observe, inherently distort the observed object. And interestingly enough, the one thing I didn't mention in my talk today was the convergence between science and quantum physics. Thank you for bringing it up. But that's the other big field, you know. And in fact, ever since that seminal book was written, The Tower of Physics by Fitness Capra, and then David Bohm, another Nobel Prize winning physicist, David Bohm, The Implicate Order, and then Niels Bohr, the founding father of quantum physics. Did you know he changed his family sign to the yin-yang sign? You know, he came from a very prestigious noble family, the coat of arms. He changed it to the yin-yang. That's quite powerful, isn't it? Anyway, so and then you have Heisenberg's, you know, uncertainty principle, you know. So there's, I mean, something else I'm interested in, Bhante, is quantum physics and consciousness studies, because the two actually are interrelated. And
wonderful. That will be the topic of our next talk.
Yes, there is the famous book called Quantum and the Lotus, written by this Matthew Ricard, and a famous Vietnamese quantum physicist at UCLA, and the book is called Quantum and the Lotus. One of the things I would recommend, I didn't mention, I'll show you, this Matthew Ricard guy. Can you see it? You can't see it very well, probably.
Beyond the Self.
Beyond the Self. It's written by him and Professor Wolf Singer. Professor Wolf Singer is one of the, so Ricard is R-I-C-A-R-D. You want to just type it for them. Ricard and Singer. Thank you. Professor Wolfsinger is probably one of the 3 top neurocognitive scientists in the world. He's the professor of bioethics at, which university is he? He's a professor of bioethics at University Center for Human Values, Princeton University. Him and Matthew Ricard, they met at a humanitarian gathering many years ago. They found that they had similar interests. Matthew Ricard used to be a scientist, and ever since then, they've collaborated on a series of discussions where the scientist is coming from the scientific angle, and Matthew Ricard is coming from the Buddhist angle. And for somebody like me who's into both, it's my cup of tea. But it is wonderful that a scientist with a serious grounding in Buddhism has this unique ability to explain things from both perspectives. So I would recommend that book, and that has a lot of research in quite, it's not too, the layperson, you don't have to be, your average, O-level science would make you understand. It's nothing heavy duty. It's definitely worth buying.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for answering Don's question. We have another question by Lalit De Silva.
Hi, good evening, Bhante. Good evening, Doctor.
Hello.
Hi, I'm calling from Sri Lanka. Thank you so much for your insights.
Oh, wow. So it's nice to have somebody from Sri Lanka. Hope you're all well over there.
Actually, we are better than any other European country because compassion is within us. We are doing a wonderful job. The best COVID controlling nation.
Good.
We have 9 deaths so far, only 9 deaths.
Wow.
Right.
We
have 22 million people in this country, and per square meter, we have about 300 people per square kilometer, but we have only 9 deaths so far. So it's absolutely, as you said, our immune systems are very strong because we do a lot of spiritual prayers and different kind of meditation. So this is another proof for you to use your research and prove that, the reason behind Sri Lankan performance in COVID control.
Wonderful, Lalit. You've done an amazing job for the tourist ministry of Sri Lanka. Please, let's go.
My question is, Bhante, Doctor, I am also great follower of James Doty and Matthew Ricard and John Kabat-Zinn, and I have seen there's enough proofs. As you said, science has proved the meditation, mindfulness meditation or any other kind of meditation, the compassion, altruism, and mental happiness, all this, at the end, we all want happiness. So we are educating ourselves for happiness, not for anything else. We are doing all this for happiness.
Yes.
However, still our education system, we have physical training, but we have not incorporated this most important toolkit for our main curriculum. Absolutely. Now, I'm a person who's lobbying in different forums in Sri Lanka, going around the country. Even during COVID time, I did my own research for different age group for families. And 21 days, within 21 days, entire happiness has changed in families by doing just half an hour meditation and using other tools like gratitude journals and forgiveness. So if there any movement, you all are coming from Western world to incorporate this mindfulness as it's in the main curriculum from the kindergarten up to the university. Because without that, I don't think we will ever be happy humanity. And also we will be, the pandemic of COVID is nothing compared to pandemic of mental diseases around the world. We don't talk about it. It's all hidden things in families and organizations. So if there anything that you all are doing for transformation, taking it to the public policy making people?
First of all, you have said something that's very, very close to my heart. Thank you so much. Yes, you're absolutely right. It has to start with young people at school. You're right. Evidence has shown, scientific studies have shown, children who are neglected, who are not stimulated, who are not brought up in love and kindness, they suffer severely. They invariably will have mental illness. I'm not talking about children who are being abused or tortured, no. I'm talking about children where they're not being looked after properly by their parents. They're vegetating in front of the telly or on the mobile phone, that kind of thing. studies have shown that children are very receptive, and you are absolutely right. The most important thing, apart from obviously doing repair to damage already done, in terms of prevention, prophylaxis, the most important thing is actually going to the primary schools, even with children as young as 4 or 5-year-olds, playful ways of mindfulness, creative ways, and there is a lot of that happening. What are we doing about it? I think, Bhante, this is one for you, Bhante. Ricky, this might be one for you. I think we need to work with Parliament, and we need to influence the education systems, and we need to, thankfully, the mindfulness process is a massive thing already in the West. It is. One of the problems with mindfulness has been, it has been secular mindfulness, devoid of the spiritual background that it came from, Buddhism. Yeah, that's okay. That's not a massive issue. You got to start somewhere. But you're right. I think I briefly, when I was a deputy chairman of the Buddhist Society in London, I did sit on the Religious Education Council. Gosh. It can be a very dry, boring academic process, I have to say. But one of the things that I think I would like to do at some point soon is get back onto that forum and lobby, lobby Parliament and education institutions. The problem is, I don't think most of the teachers are into it at the moment. In America, there is the Goldie Hawn Foundation. Goldie Hawn was a famous actress in the 80s, and she was obviously loaded. And she actually started an organization which started reaching out to inner city comprehensives, which were appallingly underfunded, where basically majority of the black and immigrant, Hispanics would go. If you have money in America, the education system is different from Britain. Basically, if you have money, you send your kids to top private schools. So the inner city schools, the comprehensive schools with gang warfare, violence, they're completely neglected. Anyway, the Goldie Hawn Foundation, as early as the late 80s, early 90s, she started in-reach, outreach work, and counselors would be going into these schools, and you wouldn't believe it. These kids who were fighting with each other, amazing results, and long-term studies that have followed these kids have shown that they do better in life. They have stable jobs, stable relationships. They escape the poverty trap. Yeah. So yes, mindfulness is incredibly important, and it is something that we have to be working on. We have to. You're right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can't hear you, Bhante. I can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes,
So
I can hear you.
Samantha has a question for us, and I would request, Doctor, I think a couple of people do have some questions, so let's try to keep it brief. Samantha, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Doctor, for this really interesting talk today. It's been really fascinating. My question is, just want to find now, in regard to the consciousness, from a medical profession, where do they actually regard the conscious to be located within the body? I mean, from a Buddhist point of view, my understanding is that there are 6 consciousnesses, or based on the contact within the 6 sense spaces.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep hearing stories that medical, the science is doing research to exactly find where the consciousness is. But my simple understanding was that I thought the consciousness was in or the mind was within the brain. But anyway, so from a medical point of view, where exactly is this consciousness?
First of all, they haven't found anywhere in particular. And secondly, can I tell you, they never will. There is no There is no locus of consciousness, no. We even in the West, we split the mind and body, but actually even that is a duality that has gone too far. When you have a pain in your leg, you know, the pain is pain. It's in your leg, yes. So your traditional medic, who probably doesn't think a lot about these things, would probably say consciousness is a product of the brain. And that's the traditional view. But clearly that isn't the case, because mind and body are related. And it's interesting, you've got to get back to this first person, third person narrative that I talked about. You are now using the first person to define your consciousness. Yes, you are now going to say, I decide that my consciousness is located in this part of my brain. It's all hypothesis, it's not going to go anywhere. So those studies are actually, although they can grab headlines, but they don't get anywhere, they won't go anywhere. Far more interesting is the kind of studies that I've actually talked about, where, for instance, to give you an example, if you're a psychopath and you look at your brain images, psychopaths have different parts of their brain lit up in different activities. So these are called functional fMRI, functional magnetic resonance images, where you can actually pinpoint specific things and make some scientific correlate. But to stab a big beast like that one, where is the seat of my consciousness? That certainly the guys that I'm following, none of them are doing those studies, but there have been, you're right, there are people trying to find the seat of the soul, so to speak. That's again a pretty Western obsession, which, you know, a lot of neurocognitive scientists have already begun to discover that that's unprofitable and it's not going to lead anywhere.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Dil has a question for you. Well, Dil?
Yes, Bhante. Now, I just wanted to say something about what two of the previous speakers were speaking about, and this is a book regarding mindfulness. And I think it was that Mendis, I think, who was wanting a program in Sri Lanka, and Bhante Dhamma had started one already, and that's called Satipasala, which is there now in a big way, because maybe 4 or 5 years ago, he actually lobbied the education department. And one of the provisos was that it should not be based on a religion. So they did with secular, and they have enormously good results. It's quite a big program, and there's lots of part from the government, which is education, but there's a whole group that's doing it now. He started it in other countries as well, and Australia has taken it up as well. So there's mindfulness there. In England, as somebody has put it up, there's a mindfulness in schools program, which is secular. And what I wanted to ask was, so there are these programs for various political reasons. They have to be started in schools and countries in a secular way, so that you could unite people rather than bring again that it only belongs to one religion. So I just want to ask the doctor a question, whether if it is a secular, I believe you are using a secular program in your mindfulness CBT and things, so it's not bringing any kind of religion into it. And would you think for us to practice with based on the Buddha Dhamma or something, that in these states of anxiety and depression, is that a better method, or to have a mindfulness secular program where with a guided meditation, would that give better results?
Hi, thank you for your question. Yes, mindfulness, secular mindfulness, is certainly good for people in the West and lately in the East, because obviously a lot of people may be atheists, or they might come from different religious backgrounds. Yeah. So in that sense, secular mindfulness is a very good thing, and absolutely, and I support it. And yes, in the NHS, in medical healthcare settings, we do tend to use the secular mindfulness model, etc. The secular mindfulness model, however, can become an object of study, and it becomes a bit academic. I have met mindfulness meditation teachers whose personal life actually is in shambles. They know how to talk the talk, but they haven't walked the walk. So that's, but that's not a big issue. I think we have to make a start somewhere, and those that are really interested in the mindfulness, they do actually then move on from mindfulness. So if you, for instance, if you want to be a mindfulness teacher, and you want to be certified in this country, and you're going to do a university degree, at some point you will have to study the foundations of Buddhist, the theory behind, and you do have to delve into the Buddhism stuff. Most people can still do it academically. What defines a religion ultimately is the bow. The bow, when we bow our heads to that which is greater than I. That is the heart of religion and practice. The bow is a mystery that will never be revealed by science. But nevertheless, secular meditation, mindfulness can certainly help with the physical side of effects. So the physical effects being heart pressure, anxiety, and all that. So at one level, it is of very good use. It is of very good use. It's about the ego fortification, I suppose. You can use it to stabilize your mind, but if, however, it entrenches your ego into deeper ruts, and my opinion is the only opinion, blah, 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 that's a different ball game altogether. That's where the humility of a religious system is terribly important. But in truth, we have to make a start somewhere, and mindfulness is a very good place. Secular mindfulness is a very good place to start, because obviously it's incredibly similar to CBT, and actually, in daily life, we can use mindfulness or CBT to improve our lives for the better and those around us. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. So, Doctor, I think we've answered a lot of questions, but before I let you go, I have one question that I think is very important to be answered.
Sure.
That is the role that stress plays in our experience of happiness. Is there such a thing? Does stress play a role? The hormones that are released into our system, does it play a role? How the attitude that we have towards stress? What are your comments on that?
Absolutely true. Stress is a powerful driver of our behavior, and stress is very, very pernicious. It is everywhere. Even to give you an example, one of the books I read up a little bit from before I gave this talk, it's a very good book. It's called Buddhism for Busy People, by a chap called David Mishi, Buddhism for Busy People. And the reason I chose it is because it's a very simple beginner's book that, Tom, Dick and Harry, you don't have to be a Buddhist, and there's a bit of humor. He's also actually famous because after he wrote this book, more recently, he's written a famous 4 set of novels based on His Holiness Dalai Lama's cat, believe it or not, which have actually gone ballistic. They've sold loads of copies. The first one, Dalai Lama's cat, believe it or not. So David Mishi, yeah. So I read up his book. And how did he get into Buddhism? So he was a successful PR man in the publishing industry living in London. He had everything. He had that beautiful townhouse in Wandsworth. He had that wife. He had that German car. He had foreign vacations. He had it all. And yet he realized, pretty early on in his late 20s, something's not working here. A bit like me. I mean, in my sort of mid-20s, I suddenly realized I had it all: a doctor, a nice wife, a couple of kids, the nice car, the nice family. You realize at some point, hold on a minute, this can't be all there is. But anyway, in his particular case, he suddenly... he was realizing he was getting stressed, but he did nothing about it, nothing at all. He went to his doctor, took some stress pills, had some sleeping problems, blah, blah, blah. And then one day, a little spot erupted on his skin. And at first he thought it was an ant bite. And then a few more spots erupted. And then, a nasty rash. And that's when he realized, yikes, what is all this? So he saw his doctor. Doctor, you know, being a typical doctor, gave him antihistamine pills, which did the job for the first week or two, but he had to keep on taking pills for a long time, otherwise the rash would come back. And then the pills were giving him other side effects. So he soon realized, yikes, I really don't want to carry on taking stress pills for the rest of my life. So he went to a person, a complementary medicine specialist, and she gave him some advice, you know, reduce toxins, reduce the amount of alcohol and coffee, etc. But she also said, start meditation. And he had a couple of friends who were already doing Buddhist meditation. And his was a very stressful life. You know, he said, I would leave home at 6:30 in the morning. Yes, I was earning in excess of six figure sum salary. This is in the 80s I'm talking about. It's a lot of money then. But I wasn't coming home before 8:30, 9. I would come home. I wouldn't even have time to chat and gossip with my wife. I would, you know, gulp something, watch an hour of telly and crash out. And this was like, and the phrase he used was, the extreme amount of stress made me feel like a hamster going ever faster in ever shortening rounds of circles. And so anyway, he started meditation, and, you know, within 8 weeks of a regular daily practice of half an hour, the rash completely disappeared, and it never reappeared. So that's a powerful, and I can give examples from my own life, but stress produces incredible amounts of hormones, cortisol, DHA, all kinds of, I mean, total hormonal imbalance. We do not even begin to know the biochemistry behind stress. It is so complicated. It's a bit like that lady who asked about consciousness and the seat of consciousness. It's like stress is like consciousness. It's all over. It affects our tummy, it affects our brain, it affects our nerves, our muscles, our liver, our everything. So stress is a tremendous, powerful driver of our behavior, and hence stress reduction, stress relief is incredibly important just for basic human functioning. I'm not even talking about a spiritual perspective here, Bhante. That's a different matter. But just on a simple level, this is why I do support secular mindfulness, because, you know, it will affect day-to-day better functioning mind and body health. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wonderful, Doctor. Thank you so much. We are getting, we have one last question, Sandhya. All right. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, we can.
So I'm Dr. Sandhya. I'm the community pediatrician. Your lecture was very interesting and gripping. And I have one very important question to ask.
Yeah.
We see many children with behavior problems, with chaotic family background.
Yes.
You said a very interesting point. One is allow them space to talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is there anything else that we can signpost parents? Like you said, there is a mindfulness program for children.
Not that much in Britain. What happens is there are particular. Japan is really advanced in this regard. A lot of the Zen, the temples in Japan, the monks and priests do a lot of work with children. But there is nothing sort of, in terms of mindfulness and children. What happens in one or two centers in Britain, one or two, very few, a monk or some practitioner takes it upon himself or herself to do a class with children once a week, once a fortnight, that kind of thing. There's nothing structured. It is something that really needs to happen. Where children, it depends what age group you're talking about, Sandhya, but obviously play is very important for young children. And what I would say, there's a tremendous number of books, storybooks coming out that emphasize the role of mindfulness, awareness, that are specifically targeted at little children. If you look at, just Google books, Buddhist books for children, you'll get also, I love children's storybooks, because I love a good story, and I think
me too, yeah.
And children's storybooks are the simplest and profound. And there doesn't need to be heavy doctrine. It speaks straight to the heart. So I think simple things like spending a bit of time, in play, activity. You can be as creative as you like, and reading them storybooks, and perhaps, sort of little things like the monkey mind and how it affects us, and drawing and drama and all kinds of play related things for little children. As they get a little bit older, 7, 8-year-olds, maybe we can play a game, who can sit still the longest, that kind of thing, There's a prize for, if you can sit still for 5 minutes without moving, right, you're going to get the chocolate, that kind of thing.
Brilliant.
It's nothing high profile. It is simple things, It's how you spend time with your own little children, reading them wholesome books, and being with them and allowing them, and not giving adult answers to their childish questions, because behind the childish question is a deep presence that asks that question, and to fob it off in scientific terms, but like the Buddha himself, he gave different messages. With children, he spoke Buddhism on the level of children. With teenagers, he gave them to as teenagers would be appropriate. So that's the beauty of this Dharma. It adapts itself to suit the requirements of people. So just be creative, spend time with them. But you're right, again, this is something that, temples need to do as well. Children's play groups, I believe in Sri Lanka and traditional Buddhist countries, they did have a habit of this. Certainly in Thailand, they still do. It isn't, it's not as prolific as it used to be, but we need to have that kind of thing. Family day events, children's day events, young Hunter, are you listening? Young people's events, teenagers' concerns, all this kind of thing. We need to do groups, and we need to bring them in and make them feel comfortable. Also, the various communities, we need to bring them, even the communities that other people discriminate against, all sorts of them. We need to bring them all in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sandhya.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandhya.
Something that I would like to add is the only school in the whole of Europe, actually, which uses the wisdom of mindfulness and Buddhism in the teaching process. Is located in Brighton, UK.
Yes.
Dhamma school, the Dharma, they call it Dharma school.
That's
and
right.
It has won a number of awards as well. And I think it's just spectacular. I went through the constitution which is posted on their website, the Dharma Center. And I thought it could have easily been passed as a constitution or a document that has been written by a very senior Buddhist monk, because it was so thoughtful of the mentalities of the children, the teachers, the administration. It's a beautiful document to even just read. And I was never so interested in such a constitution up until I read the Dhamma. And it's so beautifully written. Whoever wrote that was surely a very good meditator, for sure. And so that is a point of information that I would just like to put out there. Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you so much. And the place I see the Dhamma Center developing into is actually branching out as to be able to launch schools for kids.
Yes.
Right? Schools for kids, because I think that is the best way to impact children and to give them the stability and resilience that they so require. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you for inviting me. Lovely to have, and hope to see you soon. Message to everybody. Bye-bye.
And accepting our invitation. Usually when Ricky and I go to doctor's house for lunch and maybe a cup of tea, we end up staying up until about 9 o'clock just chatting away from book to book. Book to book. It's always very interesting to listen to all of this barrage of information that Dr. Udayan has. I just don't know where he has collected all of this stuff, but he has an extensive library as well. Thank you very much. We are so grateful. We are going to have We are going to have a number of talks coming up regarding, of course, psychology. We are having a talk also on lucid dreaming, which is going to be pretty exciting, and out-of-body experiences. I am so excited. I hope you guys are too. And so tune in. So if you have not subscribed to the Dhamma Center already, please do subscribe. You can just go into the website and subscribe to the Dhamma Center. Also, a point of information is that when we do send you emails, it will probably go into your promotion section in your email, in your Gmail. So if you change it over, if you go tap on our mail and command it to be sent into the inbox or the personal emails, then all of the emails that will come from the second onwards will appear in your inbox. So if it is, because usually when I get promotion email, I do not look at that sort of category of emails. So that is just a point of information. We are ever so grateful to Udayan. We are grateful to Ricky, who is the president of the Dhamma Center. We are grateful for all of you who have come, tuned in from all across the world. Thank you very much. And this talk will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel, the Dhamma Center YouTube channel. For more details, you can visit our website, dhammascenter.uk, for the information that you require, how to access this content again. So thank you very much. Take care and have a brilliant rest of the evening. Take care.
Thank you, Bhante. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you, Ricky, as well. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Right, I'll press leave meeting now. Yeah.